Thank you, Baz. I remember the question well, and I'm so glad that you reminded me what the answer was as well, because I'm not quite sure how I would have answered it now. So, to quote Bob Dylan, I was so much older then, I'm younger than that now. So I've got that tick, which is my Bob Dylan quote. Thank you very much. Just a little bit about me. So I was with Unilever, PwC before Unilever, and Unilever for a number of years as Global Resourcing Director. I then moved to the Financial Conduct Authority, as Baz said, and at the end of late June of last year, I decided that I wanted to do my own thing and become independent. So I set up, see what I did with the name there in terms of the branding, Paul Maxin, Max in Talent. And the first gig I had was at Zalando. Zalando, I'm sure, hands up those of you who know Zalando. Yeah. If I was to do this in the UK, I'd probably only get about half of you that put their hands up, which is really interesting. But it's Zalando is an amazing organization. It drew me in from the start. One that started in 2008 by two guys selling flip-flops. That's now listed on the German stock exchange with 12,000 staff, still growing at 25% a year, and annual sales of something just shy of 5 billion euros a year and still growing. It's an amazing but also chaotic organization. So Baz asked me from different experiences that I'd had whether I would talk about the development of talent acquisition strategy or strategies at big corporates, enterprise organizations such as Unilever. Hands up, everybody who knows who Unilever is. Thank you. And Zalando. Now, what I should say, of course, is that Zalando was a startup. It's 9 years old now. And in many ways, it has a startup mentality. But the magic there is to try and maintain that entrepreneurship, but also build things that are fit for purpose for an organization that is as now complex as Zalando is. I just wanted to go on something around authenticity, though. I'm going to go. This will also go into the beer pot as well. So it's not a question, but it's something that I might take a risk on doing just after coffee, just to make sure that you're all on your toes and brains are engaged. When I throw this, I would like somebody just to tell a joke. I mean, it can be a joke about talent, recruitment, or anything else. It's a short joke. Anybody? People are shaking their heads. Anybody?
Oh my God, I don't have a joke. Yeah, I can make one up.
You can make one up.
Yes. Oh yeah. A recruiter thinks she knows a lot about technology, and she asks a Unix engineer, "What do you know about Windows?"
Ah, okay. Thank you. Thank you. I'll do a quick one as well. It's an old joke, but it's something that will get us into the spirit of things, particularly around authenticity. And it's something. It is a joke that I first heard probably about 10 years ago, and it wasn't told by Baz. But it is as relevant today as it was 10 years ago. And it's one of those heaven and hell jokes. The employer branding manager of company X has unfortunately retired and passed away. And he has, or she has, a choice to make, which is whether eternity is going to be spent in heaven or eternity is going to be spent in hell. He or she makes the choice to have a look at heaven first. They're going to get a tour around their potential place where they're going to spend eternity. Met at St. Peter's Gates, taken a tour around heaven, and there's lots of angels, trumpets, blue sky, light fluffy clouds, and it's all very soporific and very nice and calming. And then it makes a mental note of what that is and says, right, thank you very much, that looks fantastic. Now I'm going to take my journey down and I'm going to see hell. Met at hell by the Lucifer, the devil, and actually goes through a door, and it's wonderful. It's a tropical paradise of palm trees, cocktail bars, 24/7 service, full of beautiful people. It's very fragrant, and thereupon the choice is made. I am going to spend eternity in hell rather than in heaven. And the deal is made, right, so the next morning, 9 o'clock, eternity comes. The door opens, and it's the devil with the horns and the fire and the brimstone, and it's absolutely as you'd all imagine hell to be. Whereupon it said to hell, "Hey, Mr. Devil, I came yesterday, and this was all a tropical paradise full of beautiful people. There were cocktails all of the time, and it was very fragrant. The palm trees, the sun, the sand, the sea." And the devil says, "Yesterday we were recruiting you, and today you're staff." And there's just a little message around authenticity. Sometimes things come to you, and you make the most of it as well. This is the last one, and I'm getting into it now, which is when I set up my own organization. This is about being aware, and I'll come to it, of things around you. Because the things around you in the macro environment always make a difference to outcomes that we design. This little personal story. So my final day at the Financial Conduct Authority was on the 23rd of June last year. Anybody, any ideas what the 23rd of June was last year? Yeah, it was the Friday morning that in their so-called wisdom, the British public had decided to vote for Brexit. And that was my final day at the Financial Conduct Authority, which wasn't a sort of a quiet lunch out. But what happened was I'd also been talking to Zalando. I'd set my company up, and I had one outstanding question, which was, can I invoice a UK entity in sterling rather than euros? And that was an outstanding question. They said, "No, I'm not really sure about that, but we'll ask our legal people, our lawyers, whether that's possible." And they said, "Yeah, we'll get back to you." On the 23rd of June, in the moment, I sent an email and said, "Don't worry, euros are absolutely fine. It's okay for euros." And they said, no, we really will ask our lawyers. No, euros are absolutely fine. So it's just a quick segue into, external environments always has an impact on what we do. So what are the forces? So start macro, and then we'll work our way in. And this kind of affects everybody. There are forces shaping talent and leadership. So firstly, the world economic order is changing, has been changing rapidly and ever more rapidly over the course of the last few years. So President Xi in China has a One Belt, One Road strategy over the course of the next 5 years, the 5-year China plan. And that involves $1 trillion dollars of infrastructure investment into 60 different countries. That, of course, will open up many, many more markets to China as China becomes more outreaching. Interestingly, at the same time that Trump is becoming ever more, America First policy is ever more protectionist. So perhaps globalization as we see it now, globalization 2.0, may be more China-focused. We're living differently. I'm 54 years old. Amazing though that seems. Why are you laughing? 54 years old. The population of the world has grown 2.5 times during my lifetime, and it now stands at approximately 7.6 billion. By a number of estimates, that is likely to rise by 2030 to 8.6 billion, and by 2050 to 9.8 billion. I won't go beyond that, but then that takes us through another few decades. Fertility rates are significantly below replacement level, so that's a ticking demographic time bomb. What does that mean for companies? What does that mean for a category of people I would call the capable elderly? I'm not quite there myself, but actually just thinking of a diversity question. When I went to Zalando, I was introduced as the diversity hire, which was something that was completely new to me about me. Thinking, well, I'm middle class, I'm white, and I'm male. How can I possibly be diverse? But in a company where the CEO was 32 years old and I was 53 at the time, I was the capable elderly hire. And I thought about it thereafter. So there's the capable elderly, but there's also the inside-owned, there's workforce definitions, freelancers, and neo-nomads as well. What is this all going to mean? But also, not just workforce definition, but the environment is also under stress. 30% by 2030, some estimates are that we might need 20 to 30% more food produced. Yet 40% in the developed world of agricultural land is degraded. 66%, I'm just throwing some factoids out there, but they all make a difference. 66% of the world is under water pressure. So these are significant stresses. And external and macro forces that affect the way that organizations behave, their purpose, and the way that talent and leadership does as well. And of course, as we're here, from digital evolution to data deluge. Does anybody know what a zettabyte is? Okay, Baz knows.
I said a lot.
Oh, that's the correct answer. A zettabyte is a lot. It's taken this long for world internet traffic, or in 2016, to pass 1 zettabyte. The expectation, or one expectation, is that IDG predicts that will increase to 163 zettabytes, which is more than a lot, by 2025. And that makes some assumptions and questions about how people and business manage to store data, own data, about our own data too, and how data is accessed. There is a prediction as well that in 2025 the average connected person will interact with connected devices 4,800 times a day. That's once every 18 seconds. I would contend that my 15-year-old daughter has already got there, but at least to know that she's ahead of her time. And at the moment there are 8.4 billion connected devices by Gartner's research, which is up 30% from last year, but likely to reach 24.4 billion in the next 3 years. Now, connected devices doesn't just mean mobile phones, it's kind of the Internet of Things. But again, what does this mean? What does this mean for companies? What does it mean for what they do? What does it mean for the way that we behave and our work and the way that we work? And then, conversely, the impact of GDPR. Does everybody know what GDPR is? Anybody want to say? A hand up? This beer is going to be drunk by me. It's Baz.
It's the new privacy law from Europe, which pretty much bans recruiters from stalling any information.
Yep, close. Well, yes, spot on, actually. So it's the General Data Protection Regulation. Its purpose is to harmonize EU data regulation, and it comes into force in May next year. And interestingly enough, it doesn't just apply to organizations based in the EU. It applies to data that's housed in the EU. So if you're an American or an Asian organization, but you have employees based in the EU, then it affects those organizations too. The sanctions against non-compliance are significant. They're either 4 million, it's either 4 million euros, up to 4 million euros, or 2% of gross global turnover. So in that context, those fines are pretty significant. What does it mean for recruiting? It means a number of things. Candidates have the right to opt out of automated decision-making processes, which is interesting. They may choose not to, so make sure that they opt in. Yeah? Transparency is key. Candidates have a right to know, or will have a right to know, why they've not been selected. And in terms of measurement and metrics, if they're numeric and those processes are done in a transparent way, that's fine. But we've heard the talk about AI, or what AI is in recruitment and artificial intelligence. And it may have lots of potential, but explainability isn't necessarily one of them. So how are you going to explain that to candidates if you're using machine learning or particular types of automation to make selection processes, decisions rather? So it's going to be an interesting time. Everyone has the right to anonymity. And certain strings of AI data, if you put them together, may make what was somebody that was previously unidentifiable identifiable. So there are lots of... it's not going to shut down recruitment, of course it can't. But when it comes to developing strategy, whether you're in a large enterprise organization or a small startup or an organization going through hyper-growth, then you can do all the sexy things, you can think about the macro stuff and all the connectivity, but the dry bit is actually, you've got to remain compliant as well. I've only mentioned it a couple of times, so I put that slide in without thinking that I was going to mention Brexit, but if you're looking at turmoil and things, and I haven't even mentioned Brexit yet. So this all leads to, again, whether you're in a startup, a hyper-growth organization, or an enterprise global organization, you know, the questions that talent acquisition leaders should be asking their business and their business leaders are thus, you know, what talent, skills and capabilities do we need to be able to use data? What's the impact of AI and machine learning going to be on the workforce? What are workforce definitions and how do we prepare for that? So that's what I meant by the capable elderly, inside owns, outside freelancers, neo-nomads and others. And as education and learning becomes ever more digital, how do we scale access and what will be the impact on screening and assessment? When I went to Zalando, Zalando had grown exponentially, as I'd said. It has gone through hypergrowth and still growing rapidly. But from a recruiting perspective, they were like the hamsters on the wheel. It was still operating very much as a startup. And the mantra was more, faster, quicker, but actually the economies of scale weren't that significant. And in terms of the startup mentality, Zalando didn't have every requisition, every job was kind of treated as every vacancy as the same. Without thinking about what the impact of that job or that vacancy is on the business. So again, that comes as another sort of question as well. Not all vacancies are equal, and it's not even hierarchical in that sense. You know, fact of the matter is some vacancies have a greater impact on the business and the business criteria and success than others. And if you think of a sort of a double axis where one is criticality to the business outcomes and the other one is availability of talent, then your vacancies that are in the top right-hand corner have the most amount of impact, but where there's the least amount of availability of the talent are the ones that you really need to invest the time and focus on. It's not hierarchical. So I'm just going to give an idea as to what I mean by a critical role or an impact on a business by talking about actually mentioning one in an industry that isn't either Unilever or Zalando, because I found it in trying to explain the concept at Zalando, it was quite useful to neutralize it in terms of industry. So if you take a low-cost airline, maybe Air Berlin might not be the best example, but that was the example that I gave at the time. But let's say I came on EasyJet yesterday. So in EasyJet, clearly there are important roles, but critical roles that don't involve the pilot, cabin crew, safety are... what other critical roles might there be, or a critical role that doesn't involve the pilot, cabin crew, safety, or customer services? Baggage handling? Engineers? planning, websites, all good. And I'm going to mention one that if you don't get the right person, the whole business model will fall apart. And that's the person that arbitrages the forward fuel rate. At what rate, because these things are purchased 1, 2, 3 years out, is the fuel going to be purchased? You get that right, it has significant and exponential improvement on the bottom line. You make a complete Horlicks of it, then that puts into question the whole business model, and actually you can have full planes. But if you've because the way that the margins are, if you've paid 20% too much for your fuel, then you're in deep trouble. So this is the concept about the impact of role, or the criticality of role, which is as important to startups, hypergrowths, and enterprise organizations. Now, in terms of acquiring talent, that's just it's supposed to look like a messy slide because it really is a complex and changing social media landscape for sourcing activities. So there's the social marketing management. I'm not going to go through them all. There's social commerce platforms, social business software. And actually, I did this slide a couple of years ago. You could fill it out and make it look even more messy now, but you get the gist of it. So we need to do some of this. And this is a confession that I have to make. Sometimes you have to steal things with pride. It's a shame that he's had to go. I did some work, Matt Older and I did some work when I was at Unilever, developing digital strategy. We used it for something else. So this is actually a slide that Matt Older developed probably about 9 or 10 years ago, which is great, so that it's reusable 9 or 10 years later. The sad fact is that it's still as relevant today as it was 9 or 10 years ago. Things aren't linear, particularly. The other way of looking at it is I was fortunate enough to be collected by Baz at Schiphol Airport yesterday, who brought me to Utrecht. And I was going to say that the top picture was the route that I thought we were going to take, and the bottom picture was the actual route that we took because of all the traffic. But you have to transform thinking to the straight road to the spaghetti junction. And this affects KPIs as well. We talked a little bit, some of the others talked a little bit about what are the right KPIs, cost to hire, time to hire are the typical ones. But as you'll see later on, something we did with Zalando in terms of where candidates come in and investments that you make through the recruiting funnel, things really aren't linear. It's very difficult to say that this particular source was the source. People come to careers websites, as an example, through a variety of different channels. And actually, talking about recruitment marketing or CRM tools, and candidates are in CRM tools, what is it that makes them apply when they're going to apply? So the approach is not just linear, which also makes it difficult to say, well, the actual time to hire was 28 to 30 days or whatever. Perhaps another way of looking at KPIs, and it's not necessarily one size fits all, think about what's best for your organization, but it might be something around the impact of hire. A quality of hire is often measured on retention, whether somebody's been there 3 months, 90 days to 12 months. And that isn't necessarily depictive of a quality of hire, really. It's fraught with hiring manager bias. If a hiring manager's made the decision to recruit that person, they're more likely to say it's a great hire, or she's a great hire. Why not think about some of the business imperatives that they need to deliver, such as, well, it could be customer satisfaction, it could be customer retention, it could be customer growth if it's a sales organization. And particularly if it's a startup, it might well be customer growth and growth focused in terms of the impact on hires. So you can actually start to think about maybe we should be measuring our recruiters on the impact of the hires they bring in, as opposed to just simply linear metrics around the time to hire and cost to hire. One other thing about the metrics is that one size doesn't fit all. So I'm going back to what I said about the impact of business hires. So one of the things that, I'm going to round the numbers at Zalando, but it would have been similar at Unilever too, is that you're reporting your charts and your metrics, and everything's green. So 85% of engineers are recruited within 30 days, which is pretty damn fast. And yet there's still a lot of noise in the system. The reason that there's the noise in the system, it's because the roles that have the most impact with the scarcity of talent are the ones that are taking that much longer to fill. So have a think about the risks that there are about reporting averages. Yeah? So we'd all agreed in terms of the KPIs that it should be 28 to 30 days, but the noise is because you're reporting the averages. So, messy slide, but don't worry about it. I'm sure they'll be shared. I just want to give a couple of examples around framework creation and how you can benefit from people that you have within your own industry. So this goes back to Unilever. Unilever now, I would contend, has a brilliant digital talent acquisition strategy, not least of which I was at the forefront of helping to develop it, but in a team environment. Going back a few years, Unilever has a fantastic and maintains a fantastic marketing organization. The consumer brands were at the forefront of how to utilize and develop consumer channels using digital and social media in particular, and through that getting some personalization of scope on their customers and consumers. And the marketing organization, which basically drives Unilever, was quite rightly saying to recruiting and talent acquisition, you guys have got used to, so you've got no social strategy at all. You don't know what you're doing. And the fact of the matter is, they were right. Recruitment budgets are low. Marketing budgets at Unilever are high. It's about the second largest advertiser in the world, or it was at the time. But more importantly, and most importantly, they had marketing and digital marketing expertise within the consumer marketing branch. So we brought some of those in. Actually, Matt Alder, we also brought in to facilitate some of those early sessions. And then we moved to bringing our marketing experts in to create a strategic framework. The outcomes in there aren't necessarily what you might want to do yourselves, but the ambition, objective, strategies, and actions is a useful framework to use. And at Unilever, they wanted to embrace the candidate as consumer, and everything was consumer-centric, aligning mobile, social, video search, consumer insight, and also crucially, because at Unilever, the marketing function had the money, they had the finance and the external relationships as well, whether those were the relationships with Google, with YouTube, with Facebook, but also with platforms that could publish content as well. One called Buddy Media was one that was used by Unilever, and we were able to piggyback off that. The point being that never lose sight of the expertise that you have more broadly within your own organization to help each other out and to help you build. So by the time I left Unilever, which was in 2013, Unilever was, as an example, the third most in-demand organization on LinkedIn, and is still right up there and has a very useful social strategy. This is something from Zalando. Again, here at Zalando, the focus was very much on the target audience and impact on business success. Not everything's digital, even in Zalando. We have a lot of meetups and career fairs, but also digital strategy and content strategy as well. And content strategy is key. But the thing I wanted to focus on Zalando, where Zalando as a growing organization could help, is that when I joined Zalando, I was told that 80% of candidates that joined Zalando came through the careers website. Actually, the expression was came through the careers website. Zalando is an organization that rightly eats and consumes data morning, noon, and night, and snacks on it in the hours in between, and will snack on data as a midnight feast. But when it came to people, either within the organization or recruiting, then the data that was available was at best a bit flaky. And my first session with Robert Gent shortly after I joined, I felt like I was flying blind, because he's a data-driven man, and the success of Zalando has been built on how much data they have in terms of the changes. And when it came to the most important thing, as Laszlo Brock would say, about people, had very limited amount of data, even to the extent that we weren't using Google Analytics. This is for recruitment at an e-commerce business. Certainly by the time I left, we managed to capture some applicant sources through the funnel, and what does it tell us? I guess a little bit messy here, but just to take it, you can see that some channels are more successful in raising applications, and others are more effective as you go through the funnel, and then you can start to see where the drop-offs are. One of the interesting things for me, though, in terms of going back as candidate, as consumer, is the orange one. So 7% of applications and 6% of contracts hired actually came directly from Zalando shops. So the apps. Now that's phenomenal. Actually, because if you think of it as an e-commerce business with lots of tech and engineers, and also a fashion business, broadly it was about 11 or 12% of people that went into the fashion side came to the shops, and a little less from the engineers. But that's a fascinating insight, because it also shows the connection between a bad candidate experience and the impact that a bad candidate experience can have on propensity to shop again. So Zalando has a lot of shoppers. It also has a lot of candidates, but 6 or 7% doesn't sound like a lot, but in volume terms, it really is significant. So then when you've got data like that, you can go back to senior leadership and say, hey, this is what it means. How are we going to position candidate experience as a crucial part of our journey? And Zalando now has somebody who's in the employment branding team, a guy called Chris Raw, whose sole responsibility is to lead on candidate experience and innovation. So I'm conscious of time as well. Baz has been holding fingers up at me, and I wasn't quite sure which. Yeah, okay. I thought he was being rude there for a moment. What I would say, implementing a digital reinvention. Counsel talent acquisition leaders to integrate technology now. There's a lot of there is more venture capital investment, I think, in HR and recruitment tech than just about anything else. But before you decide to move to anything else, there are very good reasons to do so, or to have add-ons. You really must optimize. It's very basic and very simple. You really must optimize what you've got first. At Zalando, there was the ATS, the applicant tracking system, was Greenhouse, very good applicant tracking system. But because the information in the applicant tracking system was flaky, the outcome, what you put in, applicant tracking systems are a bit like sewers. What you put into them depends on what you get out of them, depends on what you put into them. So don't start with the technology either. Start with what outcomes you want. For me, and there, it's very much around candidate experience and business outcomes, the combination of the two. And once you've defined what candidate experience you want to have, what business outcomes you need, then you can look at your processes and see where the shortfalls in the processes. And at that point, you can start to automate. But it actually makes the role of recruiters more interesting, because if you've done that, then you can turn your recruiter and indeed your line managers into the role of talent or hiring ambassadors as well. Top talent attracts top talent, and it's very important as well, startups or enterprise organizations, to ensure that it's not just down to the recruiting team, it's down to line managers as well. One of the best things I've heard recently is that actually it is LinkedIn. LinkedIn actually have their recruiting teams surveying their hiring managers for the recruiting team's satisfaction of the hiring managers, as well as the other way around, which is a little bit of a nugget. I'm conscious of Baz's fingers, and questions need to be asked. And if somebody's going to win the craft beer, I should shut up and listen to and hopefully answer some of your questions. So for the talking bit, thank you very much.